Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Chee-Tash. My name is Chris, and today we're going to be talking about Motor City Drama by Russell Lee Doré, Chapter 13, The Arsenal of Democracy, talking about the Big Three in World War II and how the Big Three helped with the war effort during the 1940s. Last time we talked about unionization in the Big Three and how the UAW came to form, the negotiations that happened between GM, Chrysler, and Ford with the UAW, and the kind of black eye on Ford that that happened during this time period, 1930s, 1940s, in regards to how they handled unionization and protesters. And let's just kick things off with chapter 13. Setting the picture here, Russell starts off with December 1940, in which Germany decides to invade France. And the U.S. did not initially want to enter into another war overseas. I think this was something that was hugely unpopular at the time, especially coming off the heels of World War I, where, again, I don't think people really wanted the country to enter into World War One. But lo and behold, we entered into World War One, and it was kind of a similar situation with World War Two. So, on December 29th, FDR addresses the country in one of his famous fireside chats that he was very famous for. And he says this, as Russell writes: "The people of Europe who are defending themselves do not ask us to do their fighting. They ask us for their implements of war, the planes, the tanks, the guns, the freighters, which will enable them to fight for their liberty and for our security. Emphatically, we must get these weapons to them, get them in sufficient volume quickly enough so that we and our children will be saved the agony and suffering of war, which others have had to endure. We must be the great arsenal of democracy." Within weeks, Congress later passed the Lend-Lease Bill so that we could lend armaments to our allies without us being directly involved in the war. So I don't know if Russell took that exactly from the fireside chat. It sounds like he might have. That's like a direct quotation from FDR, it kind of sounds like. Because you'd have access to that he like addressed the nation, right? So he signs this Lend-Lease Bill, lending armaments to the Allies during the war. Well, how are they going to do that? They're going to have to leverage the manufacturing sectors of the country in order to produce the armaments to lend them to the war effort. So FDR tabs GM president at the time, Bill Knudsen, to resign from GM and then head up all defense production for the nation. And then Bill Knudsen ends up setting up a meeting with the Big Three in 1941. He meets with Edsel Ford, Alfred Sloan, and K.T. Keller. And when he's speaking to Edsel Ford, or Edsel Ford rather speaks up and he says, "Hey, we got the B-24. We can do that. There is Consolidated Aircraft in San Diego has a bomber, the B-24, that they have started producing. They don't have the production capacity to make enough of them, and we've been asked to make parts for them in our auto plants. We're going down shortly to meet with them on that project. Willis has agreed to make about half, and we will make the other half amounting to 600,000 units. Those are our major contributions planned to date, but I'm sure we will take on more." And then this is where he introduces the Willow Run. Not the airport, but there is a place called Willow Run, and that's where they produced some of these armaments. Actually, I think they produced the B-24 there at Willow Run. Yeah, the Willow Run plant was built on land donated by Ford, so they had to build it, and it produced over 9,000 B-24 bombers, half the nation's output of that plane. And they did turn out one bomber per hour. We're going to get to this in a little bit. So Edsel's talking about the B-24 and then making components for this thing called the General Purpose Vehicle, the GP, which Russell writes here. They called the General Purpose Vehicle, nicknamed the GP, but you said it so fast that it sounded like Jeep, And that's what we have today, our Jeeps. That was very interesting. And then next, Alfred Sloan interjects. He's talking about using building military trucks from their GMC division. And then they're also talking about this thing called the Duck, which is an amphibious vehicle able to both run on land and in the water. And it's funny, if you go, I've taken duck boat tours in Boston. You can go on duck boat tours, and it's very cool. You'll be driving on the streets, and then all of a sudden you'll just go right into the Charles River. It's really cool. K.T. Keller then speaks up, and he is going to make tanks, or rather Chrysler will be taking on the tanks and making those to send to Europe. And he ends up building the Detroit Arsenal tank plant around Warren Township, Michigan, and they produce about 1,000 tanks by August of the next year. A lot of tanks. So again, going back to the B-24, Edsel Ford and Charlie Sorensen, they take that trip to San Diego, and they're touring the Consolidated Aircraft plant and saw how they were building the B-24 bombers. Lo and behold, they're building them kind of slow. So the B-24 is built at stationary locations, basically the opposite of an assembly line. And Edsel basically wants to take over the whole production, or he wants them to introduce the assembly line to it. They're building it way too slow. So I think the workers would have to move to each successive location, and with the assembly line, the product would come to the workers at each station and then move along like that. Well, he sets up this meeting with John Bullington. Who was Bullington? The Consolidated Production Manager. Okay, so he's the production manager at Consolidated Aircraft Plant. And Edsel is saying here, we can control the speed of an assembly line, and of course a B-24 line would move much slower than an auto assembly line, but we know how to build quality, and we are confident we can do it. Bullington asks, even if you could do that, how big of a plant would you need to build aircraft? It would have to be huge. And then this is where Charlie Sorensen comes in with this Willow Run idea. This is a rough sketch of a plant that would do the job. Here are the sub-assembly areas feeding into the final assembly line. It's got to be one hell of a long plant, says Bullington, but Charlie says, no, we would have to build one. But we have the land in Willow Run area near Dearborn. So Willow Run is kind of near Dearborn, down 94, going to, it's actually in Ypsilanti. So that's what they end up doing, is they end up building this plant, and it ends up turning out actually a plane an hour. And again, produced 9,000 B-24 bombers. And overall, the big three ended up contributing over a third of the entire nation's military equipment, writes Russell. And you can see that on this next slide of the production numbers during World War II. And it shows how America outproduced the world here. Look at that aircraft production between all of those countries. And in the beginning, U.S. was not really making a ton because they probably had to get ramped up, right? They were kind of, all these other countries were already in the war by the time the U.S. had joined in the effort. So it took them a while to get ramped up. But look, once they got ramped up, whew, lots of aircraft production. Look at that. Dwarfing the other countries. Amazing, right? And here is that source from Motor Trend, where I got that graph, that table. Thank you guys so much for listening. We just have one last chapter of Motor City Drama. The final chapter. Tune in next week for that. Guys, again, the Chee-Tash podcast. If you are interested in hearing interviews from authors, but also other interesting people, I have an interview with Russell Lee Duray. the author of Motor City Drama. You can find that on Spotify, Google, Apple, Samsung, Amazon, as well as others. Thank you very much for listening, everybody. I really, really appreciate it. My name is Chris. This is Chee-Tash. Take care.